Hello and welcome to the Moody Meeple podcast, a podcast all about the wonderful world of tabletop gaming. My name is Steve and I'll be joined by David, Dragon and Tom, and today we're going to be talking about our journeys into the hobby of board games. Hope you enjoy. Hello everyone. Right, so first of all, let's talk about our earliest memories of board games when we were kids and all that sort of stuff. Who'd like to go first?
I guess the earliest of us, Dragon.
Right, yes. Since I'm the oldest, it's probably the earliest one of the thing. Set the Wayback Machine for 1980. I'm 12 years old and I dislocate my hip getting out of a car. 5 weeks in hospital, 6 months in a wheelchair, 2 years on crutches. I'm not running around. So I'm stuck at home looking to fill my time. And I come across board games. Now, my parents have got a very old copy of the game Scoop, which is 1953, make your own newspaper type game. And this is where I start learning about this thing about board games. Now, it was an interesting game because I'd never really seen this concept of having real tactical strategy of doing a game. I mean, I've played a few Monopoly and board game and card games, but Scoop was my first introduction to a proper game, one which actually you had to think about the strategy of playing. Now, in the 80s, we were starting to get the introduction of role-playing gaming coming along, and that was quite big at school. And of course, because I was stuck in a wheelchair most of the time, I was indoors when everybody else was playing outside. So I actually managed to find a couple of other people who were also interested in gaming. And we started our own little gaming group. Okay, it's mostly role-playing. I mean, we started with a game called Gangbusters, which is 1982 release. And then as the 80s progressed, Games Workshop came in and started producing a whole load more board games. So you got things like Warrior Knights that came in about 85, somewhere around there. You got Blood Bowl and a whole of other these little games. And I just started collecting them all. And then Talisman came along and all of the expansions is just like, oh, it's like Pokemon. Got to have them all. So I started with all these little gaming bits, really as a way to keep entertained. And I found they're absolutely brilliant because there was an actual strategy you could use. You had to think about your moves rather than just playing a card or something like that. You really had to think next move ahead, what the other person's going to do, and keep planning into the future. And it was a real eye-opener. And that's what started me down this long, slippery road.
As David so nicely volunteered you as the oldest, he can go next as the next oldest.
Yeah. Moving on about a decade. Sorry, Dragon. I started looking at games like Space Crusade. I played a few other, Scrabbles and Cluedos of this world, but this is a game that really caught my attention. So this was a collaboration between Milton and Bradley, which doesn't exist anymore, and Games Workshop that brings you the likes of Warhammer 40k. Now this is set in the 40k universe, and it brings in things like Space Marines and all sorts of aliens, and yeah, it's effectively your first playthrough of a Warhammer 40k style game as a young child, and it merges the pure tabletop battle genre with board games, and effectively that's what drew me in. That I get to play with miniatures, I get to do dice rolling, and I have these variable player powers in this modular board. But I also get to play with a few mates, and it's not this thing that's going to last for days on end, spread across different scenarios. It's just a quick pick up and play. It did have different scenarios that you could work your way through, but that wasn't a necessity of this game. We also had the Dreadnought mission in place, which is the expansion. And it was just one of these things that really captured my imagination. I was really into kind of sci-fi. I think I always have been, always will be. And this really played to those strengths and captured me.
Awesome. Tom?
Yeah, I'll go next. So for me, yeah, I guess my earliest memories are the really mainstream things, like chess, Monopoly, etc. I actually went really big into Monopoly, so I think I must have ended up with at least half a dozen different versions because for me, I just really loved the experience of being around a table with people, and at the time it was the only game that seemed to be out there, and also one of the only ones I could actually persuade people to play, because although even when I came across games like Risk a bit later on, or even War of the Ring, which I think because of how popular the Lord of the Rings movies were, it was one of the games that I actually saw on shelved in mainstream stores. So I think it was Borders where I saw that. I still remember the moment where I saw it, and I fell in love. But yeah, so for me it was just about trying to get as many of these games as possible. But I think for me at that time there was this split between these easy to play mainstream games that everyone's heard of, and then anything else is a big event. So playing War of the Ring was a day long event, or even longer sometimes. When I used to play with my dad. So I think it was a big moment for me when some friends kind of showed me other games, so things like Carcassonne or Settlers or Dominion was another one at the time. Just games that didn't have that huge kind of time sink cost that meant that you could only play it quite rarely, but still had that strategic element that made it interesting and a bit more thoughtfulness to it, I guess. And so for me, I think that's what kicked it off, seeing that there was really more out there that kind of sat in that middle space, was kind of where I began, I think.
Awesome. Right, well, I guess it falls to me to round it up. I was probably the latest of all of us. Probably for me, it would have been late 90s, early noughties. And like everyone, probably, my family have always been quite big into games. Both my dad and my auntie loved playing games. Not maybe to the extent of the types of games that we would play now, but we always had Monopolies, Risks, Trivial Pursuits, Cluedo. I remember playing things like Fibbage and whatever with Yahtzee and card games. We played a lot of card games with my auntie. I think the one game that really sticks out in my mind, which my family still have and we played at Christmas, was as an old game called Formula One, which I think was an old. Was it Wainwright's? Might be getting that wrong. I can't remember exactly. But my dad's copy he picked up for I want to say he picked it up for pittance in a charity shop or something sometime in the 80s or 70s. And it was I think the copy that we looked up was probably printed in the 1960s or something. So it's a really old board game, this Formula One board game, but it's still definitely one of the best I guess motorsport themed board games that I've played. And yeah, it's probably one of those first games that like Dragon was saying, you had to think about strategy. You had to think about in this particular game, you had to think about tire wear and brake wear and things like that, and whether you want to take a chance taking corners a bit too quickly or something like that. And that's the game that I remember loving to play when I was a child, and I still love playing it now. Right, well, so that was our sort of earliest memories, and I think we've touched upon this a little bit with some of you already, but the other question I wanted to ask was when was it and how did this become a hobby? I know for me, I played games when I was a kid, but there was definitely a moment where this became a real hobby for me, and I started spending way too much money on it. So, what about you guys? Maybe we start with Tom this time.
Yeah, sure. I think for me, it kind of became a hobby when, well, I don't know. I guess it depends what you call a hobby. Like, you could say that my obscene Monopoly collection, and I actually had like a big collection of other games as well. So like quite a few different variants of Risk and things back in the day. So even then, you could kind of say it was a bit of a hobby, but definitely not to the extent that it is now. I think for me, it's kind of been a gradual transition to, instead of having like maybe a few games that I have a lot of variants of because like that's what's around. I've kind of transitioned into more of a space of just having lots of different experiences. If I had to kind of pinpoint a time, I'd probably say sometime between like university and like the start of my like first full-time job out of uni, when I started having some money to spend, I guess, was what kicked it off for me. And I think, yeah, for me, board gaming feels more like a hobby now because I just have so many different games that I play. Whereas I think prior to that, I'd say that it's probably more accurate to say that like I had well, I don't know. I don't know if I'd really call it a hobby before that, to be honest. I'd probably say that like I was into board gaming. Like I'd be up for playing a game, and I made sure to have a few different ones. But it wasn't really. I don't know. I guess I wouldn't really say it was like a part of me in the same way, if that makes sense.
And what was it about um, university and getting your first job that made it more of a hobby? Was it the were you part of a group at university, like a society or something? And yeah, what was it that made that little transition into becoming a bigger part of your life, I suppose?
Yeah, so I guess at university, just kind of spending time with like different people. I had some people that I played a few games with. So back then, I'd say I was just starting to kind of transition away from things like Risk. And so there were quite a few. I remember in my first year at university, like long evenings playing Risk with like dominoes. Um, but yeah, I think just like the exposure to like different people who kind of had different games of their own, and seeing what their experiences were, and then the same like after university at work. I guess, yeah, I guess part of it was, yeah, just kind of seeing other people's experiences and then having that sort of cash injection of like a full-time job, combined with, I think, really, I mean, maybe it's probably partially my ignorance and lack of exposure when I was a bit younger. But I think it's fair to say over the past um, like 10 years or so, board gaming generally has kind of um, become a bit more mainstream. So I see a lot more variation in the games that I see in shops now. It seems to be a lot more popular generally, partially due to things like Kickstarter. And so I think part of it for me is probably also exposure. Early on, I sort of played the games that I was aware existed, and those were the ones that I purchased. But over time, as I've become more aware of the possibilities, I've tried to embrace that, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's probably true for a lot of us. Right, David, what was it for you that made you realise that this was a hobby? What sort of, was there a tipping point, or was it a gradual,
Yeah,
like Tom?
no, it was pretty much a tipping point for me. So I had the odd board game, and I played the odd game with family, uh, pretty regularly, I'd say. But when I say regularly, it wasn't once a month. It was maybe once or twice a quarter. It was not as regular as say now. And at this point, I didn't say or feel like I was in a hobby. It's just felt like the occasional pastime that you do with family, just to, you know, stop the wheels from slowing to a standstill when you happen to be in their general vicinity. No, so
Christmas
some
and birthdays.
members of family. Yeah, pretty much. I just try to say it in a way that doesn't sound awful. I don't really want to talk to my family, so I need to play some games. But no, seriously, yeah, it was about that time that I left Cornwall, went into work in London. So around 2006, 2007, that I started to ramp up my interest in board games. I must admit, I kind of got lost in video games for a long while and didn't really find a happy balance with physical games as well as, the virtual ones until around that point. And yeah, I started collecting more and more games, and then it started to feel more like a hobby. I was, at least in the collection side of things, playing them was still fairly irregular until I met some meetup groups that played board games regularly. And when I moved to work into central London, I joined Tabletop Tuesday, which is a regular meetup for playing tabletop games in central London. And
I
that's
think I
kind
know
of
the
when
one you mean.
yes, yeah. So that's the one I really started to feel like I'm now in a proper regular hobby rather than just a hobby for collecting the games. It was a hobby for actually playing them regularly too.
Cool. And yeah, I think I've seen that meetup before. I've never actually been, if I'm being completely honest. But there is, yeah, it's quite a big one now. Well, I mean, it was before lockdown, in the centre of London, wasn't it? Dragon, I think you touched on it a little bit, but what about you? I mean, yeah, like you said, I think we've already touched on it a little bit with your earliest
Well,
memories, but
I dove into games quite a big way in my teen years, leading up to my 20s and things like that. We would have a regular gaming group. We would meet on a Saturday morning, and we wouldn't emerge from the basement of my friend's place until like Sunday afternoon. We'd often game through the night. Admittedly, most of it was role playing, but we did do quite a few board games or things like that. So I went to university late because I went straight to work when I was 16. So I spent 5 years at work and then went off to university. And when I was there, I joined the Gamers Guild, and I was actually elected president there. And we do a lot of gaming when I was at university. So I got a whole load of experience with different games, different groups, different dynamics, how the things worked. And then when I left university, I went to work. I tried to get people interested in gaming, and it just didn't happen. I mean, when you're in university with your friends, you're kind of in a clique, a group there that has the same interests. But when you're at work, people have got totally different interests, and trying to get them interested in something like gaming just doesn't happen. So I kind of left the gaming world from probably 95, 94, 95 times, right up to just like a few years ago, really, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, when I actually started getting more into to gaming groups. But this was mostly online. I mean, I've always been playing games online all the way through. I mentioned previously in the previous podcast about how I joined the Richard's PBEM game server back in about '94. So I've always had those things going on. But actual sit-down games, no, I've kind of left that for a while. And then when I started working at larger companies, I could actually find people who got similar interest. And the latest job, I'm looking around, I see the Slack, and I look through the Slack channels, I find board gaming, and bingo! I've got people with the same interests. Time to get gaming again.
I think we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But yeah, I mean, I guess my journey has been a little similar to everyone. Mine's an interesting one, I think, because I like everyone played bits and pieces, but never really got into tabletop in any particular way until I went on a scout trip when I was 17 to the Tyrol in Austria, so a valley in the Austrian Alps. And while there, two of our friends who were there brought along Magic the Gathering decks. So like just basic Magic the Gathering decks that I think they'd picked up from people that they played D&D with and role-playing games with. And over the course of that holiday, basically slowly learned how to play Magic the Gathering. And then one of the first things I did when I got back was buy myself a deck, and we all started playing Magic the Gathering. Now, the people that I played Magic with then introduced me to the people that they had learned Magic from, who were that I think I was 17, 18 at the time. They were quite a bit older. They were in their sort of, I think, 20s, 30s, that kind of age. And we all got introduced. We started playing Magic together, and then we'd have these big weekends where we would play, Magic. But then they started bringing out, a bit like we do. We'd have a quick game of something like, I don't know, Saboteur, for instance, or Ticket to Ride, or so a lot of the games that I enjoy today came from that group of people who while simultaneously teaching me how to be better at Magic, we just play loads of board games at the same time. And then like Tom and like Dragon, when I got to university, I was like, well, obviously I'm going to join the gaming society and play big board games with them. And again, another group of people who bring in lots of different weird and wonderful games. Light Dragon ended up on the committee for the society, all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, really, since, like I said, I was introduced to Magic, and then from there it was sort of like an avalanche into tabletop and board games in general, and has been a big part of my life ever since. And then obviously after university, getting my first job at a big company and finding a Slack group. And yeah, I guess this leads in quite nicely into how we all met, which is, as Dragon quite tidily summed up, is basically at our jobs through Slack. Although there is a bit more of a story to that, right? So, because I think David and Tom were at the same company long before we were, or at least long before I was.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a bit of a pattern for me in that I had created Slack groups and social groups within several organizations before I joined this particular large organization that Tom, Steve, and Dragon were all part of. And I did the same in this organization after finding that the only board game groups that were available were team specific, and they didn't really cater for the masses. And I thought that was a bit limiting. I wanted to have a group that I could meet new people. I'm not the most socially aware person. I'm pretty socially awkward. So it's nice to use board gaming and shared interests to meet new people and get a diverse collection of individuals together that have that shared interest. And it's not just all about shop all the time. You can, talk about board games too. So that's kind of where I came from for the Slack group. And I think Tom passed us by. I don't think he found us through the Slack group. He just found us playing, and we invited him along. And we were inviting pretty much anyone and everyone that had a passing interest. And
Yeah,
that's
I
pretty much
remember.
how we came together.
I remember that I saw you guys playing semi regularly, and I think I initially assumed that it was like a team only thing. And I remember, I think I just happened to sit near to you at like the Christmas party that year, and we just got like chatting about board games, and you invited me along, and that was that. And I've never looked back.
I think
Yeah.
me and Dragon started on the same day. We joined because I think I was pretty much a part of the Slack group pretty much since I joined. But just you know, being the same awkward person that I'm sure we all are, I just didn't have the courage to say, hey, I want to come and play, for like, I want to say like 3 or 4 months. I was there, and then I think it might have been Dragon saying, hey, I'm going to come today, is that alright? And having a chat about it. That gave me the confidence to say, well, I didn't even say anything, I think I just turned up. But it gave me the confidence to be like, hey, I want to join. Yeah, having someone else who was new made me feel better.
Yeah, it is always awkward when you are trying to join a new group. I remember when we were talking about that meetup group that I joined, when I first went there, you don't know anyone. And it's really quite awkward going there and you literally know no one at that particular venue. And you just feel a little self-conscious about that, right? So when it comes to starting up a board game group, it's easy to create a Slack channel. It's hard to build a community.
Yeah, that's for sure. I've always been had a huge amount of admiration for certain board game cafes. The unfortunately not open anymore, but the board game cafe in my hometown had two different things. That board game cafe, by the way, was started by the people that basically introduced me to board games. So yeah, that was, I think it was always destined. But anyway, they had two things that I've never seen anywhere else that I think were really good. One thing is they had these little signs that says, open to new players. So if you sat in a board game cafe, you could put a little sign down, and anyone who was like by themselves or maybe a couple or whatever it was a sign of saying, hey, come say hello, it's okay. And then the other thing they did is they did these evenings where you just sort of signed up for the evening, and you basically just turned up and they went, right, we've got they had like a theme of, like pirates or something. And you just sat down at a game that you wanted to play, and you just sit with strangers, and it was a bit more like university was, right? Where you just have a game, and you just sit down and play it, and you wouldn't even think about it. But that's not. It's weird that when you're an adult, it becomes harder somehow. I think it does anyway, or in the real world.
I don't know. I always found it hard going into, say, the Games Workshop store where you've got all these people that obviously know what they're doing, playing in the background. It was just, I found that quite intimidating, that environment. Whereas with certain groups, you have like guest games or you have random games that you want to just play together. People think, yeah, I don't mind. Can I play that game with you guys? It just feels a bit more relaxed than being in that, I don't want to say professional environment, but it feels a little bit more intimidating,
I feel like Games Workshop stores in general would probably be a little intimidating because of the complexity of the game is intimidating alone, let alone, and I'm generalizing here, so sorry for anyone listening who's a big Warhammer fan, but I've always found that if you go into a shop like that and play with someone, they're not always the most open people, or the most, they want to win often, unless they work at the store, in which case they want you to buy stuff. But
well, they're not interested. That's the flip side on that.
Yeah,
Sometimes the store workers don't really want to be there. They're just trying to make a buck, which isn't so great. But I give a shout out to the one in Swindon. That was great. The people in there are always really helpful. But I've been to some that actually not open anymore, and they were just the worst places to go. I'd rather just shop online in that case, which is then detaching you from the audience.
I kind of feel like part of the reason why it's so intimidating is that it's sort of the focus on just one game. It's kind of, in some ways, like when I've been to games workshops in the past, it's kind of intimidating playing with those people in the same way that it's intimidating going to a chess club when like you're relatively like new, or maybe just generally like a chess noob, I guess. Where because the focus is on one game, everyone there's kind of an expert, and they kind of expect other people to be on a similar level. Whereas I think one of the things that's nice about, say, board game cafes or board game groups more generally is because everyone plays different games. There isn't really that assumption there that everyone else knows this game well, and can play it. And that also means that people are introducing each other to new games and new ideas, and no one ever feels like it kind of pushes people away from that super competitive feel, I guess. Or at least that's how I've seen it so far, I guess.
Yeah, and I would say that's the same. Although I came into the hobby through a very competitive game, Magic the Gathering. I think I was fortunate enough that I came through a play group, who were, when you have a play group of people, even if you are playing a competitive game, the whole point is that you're helping each other because you know each other. If you were just to turn up on a Friday Night Magic, then you're immediately competing for something. And that doesn't always it's not always the best feeling. It's one of the reasons that I don't really play Magic anymore because it became far too competitive. When I wanted to play it, it became competitive. I didn't want it to be. Just wanted to have fun, which is the wonderful thing about board games.
So at work, I've actually used board games for team bonding. I mean, my team know that I'm a gamer because I've got a whole lot of games in my cabinet at work. And then when we had this like team bonding sort of thing, they said, "Bring some of the games." So the first one I tried with them was Tsuro, because you can have 8 people playing the game at once, and they found that absolutely hilarious, trying to knock each other off the games off the board. And then we tried multiple games of Flux as a card game for everybody. So we split into 3 teams, and we tried 3 games of that, and they absolutely loved it, even though they weren't gamers themselves. So I think it's very much to say that it's the actual group of people that you actually play with that kind of makes the game. Going back earlier to what you said about Games Workshop, I've been in 2 Games Workshop shops, and the one in Scotland, in Edinburgh, they were really welcoming. I mean, I literally just wandered off the streets because I was up there at the time just visiting, and they were just settling down to gaming, and they really got me talking with things. I mean, I don't play Warhammer, but these guys really got me interested with it and talking with it. I wasn't playing them; they were playing, but they were talking to me as an equal, someone else who plays games, but this was their game, and they were very enthusiastic about it, and they really made me feel welcome. And then there's the polar opposite of that is the Games Workshop on Tottenham Court Road in London. When I went there, it was like I was a complete outsider, even though I was a gamer, and I tried to talk to them about their gaming setup that they got. They just didn't want to know. They went kind of out of the way to alienate me and push me away. So it's very much dependent on the group dynamics as to how gaming groups work. So when you're actually entering the gaming world, if you have people who are welcoming, then you end up having a very good experience, even if you're not a gamer, and it can introduce you to more games. If you get the negative experience, well, that kind of puts you off gaming altogether, and it leaves you out. So it's kind of give and take as to what kind of gaming group you get. I mean, Steve, you had the people interesting you with Magic, and you got this impetus to get going with it. But if you're on that group and they just said no, not going to teach you or anything, how would have that changed your gaming outlook?
Oh, for sure. Like if my friends hadn't been so willing to share the game with us, then yeah, I potentially never would have gotten. Well, maybe I would have done. I think I was kind of that way inclined anyway. But yeah, it would have taken a lot longer. I mean, we were very lucky that we had these two friends that were playing this card game, and we were like, oh, cool. There's like goblins and orcs and stuff, and you're firing spells off. Oh, that's so cool. And then I want to say I think 5 of us as a result learned and started playing. So yeah, it definitely would have changed the outset. I think it's always difficult when it comes to a store, right? It's difficult because some stores will have a nice community around it, and if you can enter those stores and see regulars and play games, or if you go to certain events at the store and see other people, and I think that's always good. But I do think stores it's difficult to judge, right? Because ultimately they're trying to make a living, right? And so they're trying to sell you something at the end of the day often, and so you're never always going to get and this isn't true for everyone, but you might not always get the best experience trying to find like a gaming group by going into a gaming store, I would say. And that's, I mean, like I said, I'm generalizing here. There's plenty of stores that do regular events, and those events are normally, whether they're free or if you pay a little bit of money, they're normally pretty good for finding other people. I met my D&D group through a meetup, and since lockdown we basically haven't had anything to do with the meetup group. We've just become our own group. So, but yeah, I totally agree that it's very much to do with the company that makes it enjoyable. Having said that, I think there was a small period of time between just before university and even towards the end of university where I didn't have many people that I played with. Either I think towards the end of my university course I stopped going to gaming society so much just because just uni work became more important, and so it did become sort of few and far between when I used to play games, but I never stopped buying them. So my collection kept growing, even though I maybe wasn't playing with as many people. And it's times like those that I wish I'd known about, like Board Game Arena and stuff like that, just to be able to play with strangers online. But yeah, I've been fortunate enough that I've held out and found a group now. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that we have kind of formed a core as a board gaming group, and it's the 4 of us that drive that core.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But we do have other people from work who drop into these games as and when they have the time. So it's having a good core of people who are actually friendly and welcoming to other players. I mean, we've all been there. We already know people who feel a little bit lost in a new group. So having a group that's very welcoming helps everybody.
And actually, moving, I think that our sort of last subject was gonna be on how things have changed for us. I think we're sort of moving into that subject anyway. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was the fact that we've started to go, well, in 2019 and then hopefully this year, we've started to go to the UK Games Expo, a few of us, and actually that's a really good place where literally everyone in a massive building is all obsessed with board games. And one of the things, we didn't play a lot of games when we were there in 2019, but one of the things that did strike me as being good there is that everyone was incredibly friendly and welcoming, and us included. I think I think we played a couple of games of Ticket to Ride London with complete strangers. But yeah, I think expos are also not a bad place because you get to playtest things, and then you have people like our friend Simon, who works for Asmodee, who just be sort of chucking people into games, and you're sort of forced to socialise.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was involved with the Dragon Meet, which is the regular December meeting here in London. So back when it was at the Kensington Town Hall, I used to bring along my games and just invite people to play. And one game we had there, were playing the big game of Talisman. We had 16 people playing the game at the same time. That was crazy, but a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely sounds it. Is there any other things that we can think of that about how how it's changed for us? What's different now maybe than our sort of first play groups or whatever? Is it just consistency, I suppose, or money is a good one.
I think one of the things that's changed for me is my attitude to like winning games. So I feel like over time I've kind of come to realize that well, I think even in the beginning I would have said like it's not about winning, it's about having fun. But I think over time I've kind of maybe moved further along those lines to like focusing on like the games that I want to play are games that don't just feel good when you're doing well, but they feel good even when you're losing. And maybe that's because like you feel like you're part of a bigger story in the game, or maybe because like you feel like you've built something, like in like a I don't know a Tableau builder or something. But I think just moving away from that sort of really competitive aspect to games for me has been quite a big thing. And I think in the past, like I probably would have looked down on like co-op games a little bit, but definitely these days I'm kind of they're growing on me a lot more than they used to. Just because I feel like in those situations you can kind of collaborate on having fun together, and I think that's what board gaming is for me now, maybe more than ever. It's about kind of having that shared fun experience.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. We were having a little bit of this conversation the other day. Stonemaier games, Scythe and maybe not Scythe so much, but Wingspan and I think Viticulture we've played. Both of those games, and I think it's true for a few Stonemaier games, is there's not a lot of like screwing your friends over. There's a lot of just focusing on building what you've got to build and getting the right achieving the goals that you need to achieve to win the game. It's not so much of this some games are incredibly competitive, and sometimes that's fun, but some games are just like constant, just sort of screwing each other over, which isn't. I think that gets old sometimes, quite a lot. And
part of my journey kind of involved. So I had a period where I was really into Munchkin, and I've got even now I think like quite a few variants of it, and that's a game which is literally about like kind of slapping down the leader. And so for me for a while that was quite fun because I was quite good at sort of timing things to do quite well from it. But I could kind of see that like I guess sometimes the people I'd play it with like wouldn't be having such a great time, or like even when you're in a situation where like you're the one being slapped down, it feels very different. And so I think that's a big part of it for me, like that sort of take that in games, which I think these days I'm quite happy to play games that have take that in them, but I tend to prefer it when it's not like crippling, if that makes sense.
You have to be in the mood for that kind of game, and I think that's probably what's changed about me. That used to be the game that I'd play. I was very much into things like PvP gaming in the PC gaming world, and that kind of transferred a lot into playing multiplayer games on the tabletop. But I have mellowed a lot in my old age, and I'm kind of more favoring games where it doesn't matter what the outcome of the game is. And actually, I care a lot less about winning games these days than I used to. It's more about really taking part and having that fun shared experience. And that's kind of what I'm taking to the table when I play with my parents, with, mostly the core gaming group when I'm not trying to learn the game, because that adds an added frustration. But yeah, generally I'm a lot more laid back than I used to be.
I'd like to think that about myself, but I don't know if that's true. I mean, I think I've always preferred co-op games in general, actually, personally. Just because I think the you win together and you fail together, right? And ultimately at the end of it, you've had fun together. You can't really there's no one to blame when it's co-op, even though it's a co-op game. Well, you're working as a group, really. So I mean, if you make a collective decision to do something and it goes wrong, then it's not necessarily. I mean, someone could maybe have an idea that doesn't quite work out, but ultimately it's collaborative.
It's a shared experience.
Yeah, for sure. And
I just remembered another reason why I moved into collaborative games. It was actually my little brother that hated playing competitive games with me.
yeah, I mean that's certainly true as well. Like one of the dynamics that I have with my partner is I think sometimes, not all the time, but some gamers that try and get their partners into games aren't always the nicest to play with. They can be overly competitive and still want to win, even playing with people that have barely played the game or whatever. And I like to think I'm not like that. I don't go easy on people, but I'm not playing to win in those scenarios, and I don't want to be perceived in that sort of sense of being like, I play this game so I can beat you kind of thing. So I mean that's one other reason why I would prefer a co-op game if I was playing with my partner or my family, perhaps. Although actually playing with my family, my dad and my auntie is in her 70s now, and I introduced her to Tekken Echo, a game about pandas, to a 70-year-old woman, and she whooped my ass. She was amazing at it, and she was like, "Oh, I don't really know what I'm doing," and then just like absolutely obliterated us. So I mean, playing with my family, trying to beat my dad is actually often a goal, to be fair.
I have definitely found that in situations where I'm maybe introducing a game to people, or maybe playing with like quote unquote non-gamers, I do find that if I can find a way to kind of not win, but not in like a disingenuous way, but just in a kind of maybe I don't like spend as much time thinking through my decisions as I normally would, just to kind of because I guess it's quite easy to, as the more experienced gamer, to like really leverage that, and I find it really adds to the experience when like someone unexpected wins, or when it's not the person that has all the experience. But yeah, I guess it's sometimes easier said than done.
I think for
But that's
me,
I'll go for it.
I think I definitely sometimes use it as an opportunity to try maybe a bit of a left field strategy, or just sort of try something different. And a good example actually would be I played a few online games of Splendor and realised that maybe beforehand I was going for like nobles too much, when they really didn't offer you that much advantage. And so I realised like you could sort of race for the higher pointed cards. But then when I played the Marvel Splendor that I got with my partner, I just sort of decided I'm not going to try and I'm not going to go for a specific strategy. I'm just gonna play it and see what happens, kind of thing. So I think that's certainly true for me as well.
You don't play to lose, but you also don't optimize your game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe be a bit freer with like fun plays rather than like min-max plays, I guess, can
Yeah.
be a good one. So like going for maybe playing this card because it looks cool and it's fun and it's going to do some crazy thing, rather than like seeking like the utmost advantage at every turn.
And offering advice, I guess, is a good thing. That when you're teaching someone how to play, once they've learned the basics and they're playing, you could kind of coach them on strategies as well as the core gameplay. I found that helps with making sure I don't win so at least easily, because sometimes you could go through the motions. You're not even doing the whole min max thing, and still somehow you end up winning easily. It's, oh god, how can I make it so I don't win so easily? But especially when you're talking about family who, like you say, they might play a game once a year when you come over or something, and then it's much more about making sure that they understand the strategies behind the game, the logic that you're implying to get to a certain position.
But, I mean, there's also games that, for me, are better for less strategic games. So, Dragon's least favorite game, Dixit, which I've mentioned before in the podcast, is a really good one to play with people who don't regularly play board games, because it's all about association and imagination and sort of stuff like that, and you can't really strategize for that at all. I mean, you might be able to know which cards are people tend to associate words with or whatever. And games like Codenames and sort of more party-like games, you can't tend to predict. So those games are slightly better for families and whatnot. Cool.
Yeah,
Well,
I was actually thinking games like Via Magica, or it's things of that level where they're not difficult to learn, but it's difficult to optimize for. That's usually a good place where you can go through the motions and they can learn about the game, and effectively it's glorified bingo. So it's a nice game to get people introduced to board gaming, tabletop gaming.
I wanted to mention actually, and then Tom mentioned Munchkin. I think a few days ago, very unfortunately, a man called Andrew Hackard fortunately passed away. His official title was Munchkin Czar, but I think it was brand manager of Munchkin. So I just wanted to shout out to his family and to Steve Jackson Games. And sad loss for the industry. Basically, he was involved in pretty much every Munchkin game ever. So even if you didn't know his name, you probably know his work. So yeah. But anyway, if you'd like to share your story and how you got into board games, then make sure you either tweet us at #Moody Meeple on Twitter, or in the comments on the YouTube video that will be eventually uploaded. Sorry it took so long last time, and we will mention it in the next podcast. Thank you very much to Dragon, David and Tom for joining me today for this chat about their pass into the board game, and thank everyone for watching the live stream or watching after the fact, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.